Welcome the anointed ones. The truth doesn't knock politely. It kicks the door in, flips the lights on, and points at the mess everyone pretended wasn't there. What you're about to hear isn't inspirational, and it's definitely not comforting. It's unsettling, slightly nauseating, and weirdly clarifying. Because this isn't about rumors, intuition, or you overthinking. This is about an actual confession. One that didn't come wrapped in courage or honesty, but slid out awkwardly, like a receipt someone forgot to shred. The kind of confession that smells like panic, not accountability. Here's a fact most people don't like admitting. Confessions rarely come from morality. They come from pressure. Studies on deception consistently show that people tell the truth not when they feel bad, but when maintaining the lie becomes more stressful than admitting it. In other words, honesty often arrives late, sweaty, and out of breath. And when it does, it doesn't arrive alone. It brings flashbacks, missing pieces, and that uncomfortable feeling of realizing someone smiled in your face while doing something foul behind your back. What makes this situation especially disturbing isn't just what was done, but how long it was carried out in silence. There were rehearsed conversations, fake reactions, and Oscar-worthy performances. You were given front-row access to a reality that wasn't real, while the real story was being passed around quietly like contraband. That's not coincidence, that's coordination. And let's be honest, if betrayal had a personality, it wouldn't be loud or dramatic. It would be polite, friendly, asking how your day went while holding a secret like, "Yeah, so about that." That's the part that makes you laugh a little out of disbelief, because the audacity is almost impressive, almost. This isn't about revenge or outrage, it's about clarity, the kind that makes you sit back and say, "Oh, so that's what was happening." Once you hear what was confessed, certain moments start replaying differently. The jokes that landed weird, the energy shifts you brushed off, the sudden coldness that had no explanation at the time. So if your stomach turned a little when you read the title, good, that means your intuition was already onto something. Because this confession didn't expose you, it exposed them. And once the truth speaks, there's no putting it back in the box, no matter how awkwardly they try to laugh it off. Number 1. The confession didn't come from guilt, it came from panic. This is the part people get wrong. When someone finally admits what they did behind your back, everyone wants to believe it came from a sudden wave of remorse. Like they woke up one morning, stared at the ceiling, and decided to do the right thing. That story sounds nice, but it's rarely true. What actually pushes most confessions out into the open is fear. Fear that the lie is cracking. Fear that the wrong person now knows too much. Fear that the story they carefully built is about to collapse in front of witnesses. Panic doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up as rushed explanations, awkward timing, and a confession that feels oddly incomplete. They start talking not because they want to be honest, but because staying quiet suddenly feels dangerous. Something shifted. A conversation happened without them in the room. A look lingered too long. A question was asked that shouldn't have been asked. That's when the pressure started squeezing their chest. You can usually tell panic-driven confessions by how defensive they sound. There's too much explaining, too much framing, too much effort to control how you receive the truth. They don't just tell you what happened, they tell you how to feel about it. That's not accountability. That's damage control dressed up as honesty. What makes this hit harder is realizing how long they were comfortable not telling you. Days, weeks, sometimes years passed without a flicker of guilt strong enough to stop them. They laughed, made plans, shared space with you, all while carrying information that would have changed everything. That tells you the confession wasn't born from empathy. It was born from self-preservation. And here's the uncomfortable clarity. If the pressure never showed up, the truth never would have either. They didn't confess because they respected you. They confessed because the lie became harder to manage than the truth. Once you understand that, the confusion clears. You stop romanticizing the admission. You stop searching for sincerity where there was none. You see the confession for what it really is. Not a moral breakthrough, but a survival move. Number 2, what they did behind your back was deliberate, strategic, and rehearsed. This wasn't a random slip or a moment of weakness. What they did was calculated, like a chess player thinking 5 moves ahead. Every word they said, every action they took, every small detail they manipulated was intentional. They weren't careless. They were precise. The fact that it shocks you now only proves how convincing their act was while it was happening. They made sure you didn't see it coming, and that was part of the plan. They took time to consider the consequences, to figure out how far they could push without being caught. They weighed outcomes and adjusted their behavior accordingly. What feels disgusting isn't just the act itself, it's the calm, almost clinical way it was carried out. While you were living in what you thought was reality, they were running experiments in deception, testing reactions, and refining their story for maximum effect. That level of premeditation changes everything. It isn't a mistake you can forgive because it wasn't accidental. It was intentional, and the full weight of that realization hits harder than any single detail of the act. The rehearsed nature of their actions also explains why you felt something was off without knowing what. There were inconsistencies, little slips, and moments that didn't add up, but they were subtle enough to be dismissed. They counted on your trust and your patience, knowing you'd overlook the small stuff while they executed the larger plan. That's the manipulative brilliance of it. They weren't impulsive, they were methodical, and that's why the confession feels like a gut punch. Now, when you look back at all the interactions, the casual smiles, the friendly conversations, the way they seemed normal, it's horrifying to realize every one of those moments was carefully curated. They were performing, and you were the audience. The betrayal isn't just the act itself. It's the understanding that every second you were comfortable, they were rehearsing the very thing that would eventually devastate you. It's a calculated cruelty disguised as everyday life, and that's why it leaves a lasting sting that lingers long after the confession is over. Number 3, they enjoyed the safety of your ignorance. What's truly unsettling about betrayal is realizing that the person didn't just act behind your back. They thrived in the darkness you didn't know existed. Your unawareness was their playground. Every lie they told, every secret they kept, every manipulation they executed was amplified by the fact that you had no idea. That comfort, that smug little bubble of power they enjoyed while you went about your life believing in honesty, is what makes the confession so revolting. They weren't struggling with guilt. They were basking in the control your ignorance gave them. While you were calm, trusting, and unaware, they were alert in a way that made them feel superior. They measured every reaction, calculated every move, and took pleasure in the fact that you were none the wiser. That feeling of safety you had, the one you took for granted, became a tool for them to use against you. It's horrifying to realize that your trust wasn't respected, it was exploited. The enjoyment wasn't loud or boastful. It was quiet, subtle, and almost invisible, which made it even more insidious. The real cruelty is in how easily they manipulated your perception, without ever having to lift a finger in confrontation. Even when the confession finally came, the taste of that power lingered. They might have admitted what they did, but the satisfaction they once had in knowing you were unaware isn't something words can fully erase. That's why the revelation hits like a shockwave. You don't just learn what they did, you understand how comfortable they were doing it without your knowledge. This makes you realize something vital about human behavior. Ignorance is a luxury for the manipulator. The longer they can keep someone in the dark, the longer they can feel untouchable. And the moment the truth emerges, it's like watching someone tumble from a throne they built on deception. What you feel now, anger, disgust, disbelief, is proof that your trust wasn't meaningless. It was powerful enough to make them feel superior. And that's the exact reason their confession is so disturbing. It exposes the depth of their audacity, the cold calculation of their actions, and the reality that for them, your ignorance was everything. Number 4. The confession is missing key details on purpose. When someone finally comes clean, it feels like relief at first. You think you're about to get the full story, the entire picture, the truth laid bare. But in reality, most confessions are carefully trimmed, edited, and curated. What they reveal is only a fraction of what actually happened. Every omission, every hesitation, every vague phrasing is intentional. They're not just confessing, they're controlling the narrative, deciding which pieces of the puzzle you get to see and which ones remain buried. That's what makes it so frustrating and disturbing. The missing details aren't accidents or lapses in memory. They are strategic gaps meant to soften the blow, protect their image, or prevent you from seeing just how far the deception went. By leaving out the worst parts, they try to make it seem like they're owning up to something significant, while the full extent of their actions stays hidden. That's why the confession can feel hollow, incomplete, or oddly unsatisfying. You get the outline, but the essence, the full weight, is carefully masked. Those gaps force your mind to fill in the blanks, and often the imagination makes the truth feel worse than what they actually admitted. Every missing detail is a silent admission of their calculation, a sign that they know some parts are too damaging to share. They want you shaken, but not completely destroyed. They want acknowledgement without accountability. That subtle control is what makes the confession more manipulative than the act itself. Understanding this changes the way you process the situation. It explains why the confession leaves a lingering unease, why something feels off even after they've come clean. The truth they give you is a version they want you to see, not the one that actually happened. Recognizing that lets you separate their narrative from reality. You start seeing the confession for what it is, a performance dressed as honesty, a tool for self-preservation disguised as accountability. Once you realize that, you stop accepting their words at face value. You start watching their actions and listening between the lines, because the most important parts of the story were never spoken. Number 5. They told the truth only after others already knew. One of the most unsettling truths about confessions is that they rarely happen on the confessor's timeline. Most of the time, the person only admits what they did because someone else already knows. The confession isn't a display of courage or morality. It's a strategic retreat. Once whispers start circulating, once people begin piecing together the story on their own, they realize the lie they've been living in can no longer hold. The pressure of exposure forces their hand, and suddenly honesty becomes their only option. This is why confessions often feel awkward, incomplete, or defensive. They aren't coming clean because they want to. They're doing it because they have to. The truth wasn't a gift. It was a lifeline. They're trying to reclaim control over a narrative that's slipping out of their grasp. You notice the difference immediately. The words are rehearsed, the timing calculated, and the emphasis is placed more on minimizing damage than on taking responsibility. They admit just enough to seem human, but not enough to truly be accountable. What makes this even more revolting is the realization that their awareness of who already knew changes the meaning entirely. The confession becomes less about you and more about saving themselves. They're not worried about how you feel or the trust they shattered. They're worried about the story getting bigger than them, about losing face, about being judged before they can frame the truth on their own terms. Understanding this flips the narrative in your mind. The shock and disgust you feel aren't just about the act itself, they're about the manipulation behind the timing. They allowed others to discover their actions first, which means they were counting on someone else to crack the facade for them. Your realization now is clear. The confession wasn't brave, it wasn't morally driven, and it certainly wasn't respectful. It was calculated, and the fact that it comes only after exposure confirms the depth of their audacity and the cold, strategic way they approached betrayal. Number 6. They underestimated your discernment, not your kindness. One of the most frustrating things about betrayal is realizing that the person responsible didn't fail because of luck or exposure. They failed because they misjudged you. They assumed your patience, your empathy, and your willingness to give the benefit of the doubt meant ignorance. They thought your kindness was a shield against suspicion, that you wouldn't notice the inconsistencies, the small slips, or the subtle energy shifts that hinted at the truth. That underestimation is what made their eventual confession both inevitable and humiliating. They treated your perception as if it were blind, not realizing that kindness and awareness can coexist. While they were busy orchestrating, lying, or manipulating, you were quietly observing, piecing things together in a way they never anticipated. You weren't passive. You weren't oblivious. Your calm exterior masked an attentive mind that registered far more than they could ever calculate. And when the truth finally surfaced, it wasn't because they expected you to forgive. It was because they finally realized you weren't as naive as they thought. This misjudgment fuels part of the panic behind their confession. They assumed control over the narrative would last indefinitely, that their confidence in their manipulation was enough to keep you unaware. But discernment isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It works quietly, patiently, like a shadow that never leaves. And eventually, that shadow caught them off guard. The same people they thought were blind to their schemes were the ones who saw the cracks forming, the inconsistencies piling up, and the truth threatening to emerge. Understanding this makes the betrayal sting in a strange way. It's not just the act itself, it's the arrogance behind it, the assumption that your empathy equaled ignorance. That assumption is what allowed them to go as far as they did, and that assumption is also what caused their eventual panic, their forced confession. When the dust settles, one thing becomes clear. The problem wasn't your judgment. The problem was their audacity to misread it. And that realization gives you a quiet, unshakable clarity about both their character and your own unacknowledged strength. Number 7. The most disgusting part is how they justified it to themselves. What makes a betrayal truly revolting isn't only the act itself. It's the mental gymnastics the person went through to make it feel acceptable. They didn't just lie or deceive, they convinced themselves it was okay. They built a narrative where their actions were reasonable, where you somehow deserved it, where the blame shifted subtly onto you. That level of self-deception is far more disturbing than the betrayal because it exposes the depth of their moral distortion. They weren't wrestling with guilt. They were convincing themselves that the disgusting behavior was permissible. This justification often comes wrapped in subtle reasoning. They'll tell themselves that you provoked it, that circumstances made it inevitable, or that it was just a small thing compared to the consequences you would face if they were honest from the start. In their mind, they're the victim of the situation, of your reactions, or even of their own conscience. They manage to reframe reality, turning manipulation into a moral loophole and cruelty into a defensible act. That's why when the confession finally comes, it feels so hollow. They don't really apologize, they explain, rationalize, and try to preserve a shred of their self-image. The truly unsettling part is how effective this self-justification can be. It allows them to function without being haunted by the truth, to interact with you without the weight of genuine accountability, and to maintain confidence while committing acts they would have condemned in anyone else. That combination of audacity and distorted self-perception is what makes the betrayal linger in your mind long after the confession. You realize the damage wasn't just external, it was psychological, built on a foundation of warped thinking that enabled the act in the first place. Once you recognize this, the disgust shifts into clarity. The confession no longer feels like honesty, it feels like a glimpse into the warped reasoning that allowed them to betray trust so fully. The lesson isn't about the act itself, but about the character behind it. The realization is bitter, but it's sharp, illuminating exactly who they are, why they acted as they did, and why your awareness, your discernment, and your patience were never truly valued. Number 8. The confession is about relieving their discomfort, not healing yours. One of the harshest realities about confessions is that they are rarely, if ever, centered on the person they hurt. When someone finally admits to the betrayal, it's not about repairing the damage or taking responsibility in a meaningful way. It's about lifting a weight off their own chest. They've been carrying the tension, the anxiety, the fear of exposure, and the mental exhaustion of keeping a secret. The confession is a release valve for them, a way to breathe easier while leaving you to process the fallout on your own. This is why confessions often feel selfish. The timing, the delivery, the tone, everything is designed to alleviate their stress, not to soothe yours. They choose words that make them appear courageous or honest, but the truth is, they're motivated by the discomfort of living with a lie. Your feelings, your shock, your anger, and even your disbelief are secondary. That doesn't make the act any less real, but it shifts the perspective. This isn't an act of remorse, it's an act of self-preservation disguised as honesty. What makes this even more unsettling is that they often expect forgiveness or understanding in return for unloading their burden. They want the relief of confessing, but they hope you'll absorb it graciously, as if their discomfort should automatically generate empathy from you. That expectation is audacious, almost offensive, because it flips the natural order of accountability. You're not supposed to comfort them for betraying you. They're supposed to face the consequences while you process the reality of their actions. Recognizing this flips the narrative in your mind. You stop framing the confession as a moral gesture and start seeing it for what it really is, a self-serving act. It clarifies that their priority was never you, never your healing, and never your trust. The realization is bitter, but it's empowering because it allows you to detach your response from their intentions. You can feel your emotions fully without letting their discomfort dictate how you process the truth. Their confession isn't liberation for you, it's exposure for them, and understanding that gives you the clarity to reclaim control of the situation and your own peace of mind. Number 9. They never planned to tell you. The situation forced their hand. The most revealing thing about a confession is often not what is said, but why it's said at that particular moment. In most cases, the person never intended to admit the truth at all. They were comfortable living with the lie, navigating life as if everything were normal, and trusting that no one would discover what they had done. The confession only happens because circumstances corner them. Something shifts outside of their control. A slip is noticed, a message leaks, or someone else pieces the story together. And suddenly, staying quiet is no longer an option. The hand that once held the secret now trembles under the pressure of exposure. This understanding changes the entire perception of the act. It wasn't honesty, it wasn't bravery, and it certainly wasn't respect. It was forced survival. The confession is the last resort, a calculated acknowledgement designed to contain damage, salvage a reputation, and regain some measure of control over a narrative they thought they owned. That timing is what makes it so unsettling. They weren't thinking about you or your emotions. They were thinking about what would happen if the lie fell apart completely. What makes it even more disturbing is that their entire pattern of behavior leading up to the confession is revealed in that moment. You can see how far they were willing to go to avoid accountability, how long they manipulated, how carefully they curated every interaction to keep you in the dark. Their panic, hesitation, and selective disclosure expose the lengths they went to protect themselves while leaving you vulnerable. Recognizing that their confession was forced strips away any illusion of morality or courage behind it. It becomes clear that the act was never about repairing the damage or owning up voluntarily. It was about being caught before the consequences got worse. That realization is both infuriating and clarifying. It tells you everything about their character, about their priorities, and about the cold, calculated way they operated. You now see the truth, not as a gift, but as an unavoidable consequence. A last-ditch effort to save themselves while leaving you to process the betrayal on your own terms. Number 10. You weren't betrayed because you were weak. You were targeted because you were solid. One of the most shocking truths about betrayal is understanding why it happened to you in the first place. It wasn't because you were naive, vulnerable, or easily manipulated. It was precisely the opposite. You were targeted because you mattered. Your strength, your clarity, your integrity, the very qualities that make you who you are, threatened them. People rarely waste time undermining those who are inconsequential. The fact that someone went to great lengths to deceive you, manipulate you, and hide their actions speaks volumes about the power they perceived in you. This realization changes the way you process the betrayal. It reframes the narrative from one of weakness to one of significance. They didn't see you as a passive participant in life. They saw you as someone capable of revealing truths, exposing lies, and shifting the balance of power. That's why the acts behind your back were calculated, deliberate, and so unnerving. They weren't random, they were strategic, aimed at neutralizing a presence they couldn't easily control. Understanding this also explains the audacity and complexity of the deception. Every lie, every hidden move, every careful manipulation was designed to contain someone who was fundamentally uncontainable. They had to go to extreme lengths because ordinary tactics wouldn't have worked. Their actions were a reflection of how threatening your integrity and discernment were to their comfort, their ego, and their false sense of control. There's a hidden empowerment in recognizing this truth. You weren't a victim of circumstance. You were the focus of attention precisely because you represented something real, substantial, and formidable. The betrayal says more about their insecurity and inability to match your strength than it does about your capacity to trust. In the end, what they hope to suppress through deception and manipulation only confirms your value and resilience. You were never weak in their eyes. You were formidable, and that is exactly why they tried and ultimately failed to undermine you. Number 11. Their confession accidentally revealed who they really are. When someone finally admits to what they did behind your back, the words themselves aren't always the most important part. What really hits you is the way they say it, the timing, the hesitations, and the tone, all the unintentional signs that reveal the person underneath the mask. A confession, especially one forced by circumstance, often exposes far more than the action itself. It's a window into their true character, the side they tried so hard to hide while everything was happening. As you listen, you notice patterns: defensiveness where there should be remorse, over-explaining where honesty would suffice, and subtle shifts in body language or phrasing that scream discomfort. These are not random, they're cracks in the facade, tiny betrayals of authenticity. In trying to control the story, They reveal their priorities, fears, and weaknesses. You begin to see that the person you thought you knew wasn't just dishonest. They were calculating, manipulative, and willing to rationalize cruelty to protect themselves. That realization is more shocking than the confession itself, because it strips away the illusion you once held of who they are. The confession also exposes their mindset in high-pressure situations. You see how they think when the stakes are personal, when their ego is threatened, and when accountability is unavoidable. Their reasoning, justifications, and even the way they try to frame their actions for your acceptance tell you more about their true self than months or years of interaction ever did. The mask they wore for so long falls away in a matter of minutes, leaving you face to face with the unvarnished reality. That accidental revelation is both infuriating and clarifying. It explains behaviors that once seemed confusing, patterns of deceit that were difficult to understand, and the subtle manipulations you couldn't quite put your finger on. Their confession doesn't just tell you what they did, it tells you who they are when no one is watching, when no one is protecting them, and when they believe they're managing the fallout. And in that truth, harsh as it is, you gain insight and clarity, a final piece of understanding that they never intended to give you, but that now empowers you to see them fully, without illusions or excuses. Number 12. They're more afraid of being seen than of losing you. One of the most uncomfortable truths about betrayal is realizing what really motivated the person who did it. When someone finally confesses, it often seems like a moral awakening or fear of losing your trust. But in reality, their primary concern was never about you. It was about themselves, about how the world would see them if the truth came out. Their panic, their awkward timing, their half-hearted explanations all point to a deeper fear: exposure. They weren't worried about the damage to your relationship. They were worried about the damage to their image. This shifts the perspective entirely. The confession isn't born from conscience, it's born from self-preservation. They didn't want to lose your love, respect, or presence as much as they wanted to stop people from judging them, gossiping about them, or seeing them for the manipulative person they truly are. That fear of being seen, of having their carefully constructed persona crumble, often drives people to confess before the full consequences hit. But the confession itself is calculated to minimize their embarrassment rather than address the pain they caused. When you recognize this, it makes the betrayal feel even more deliberate. They weren't operating out of human decency, guilt, or concern for you. They were operating out of survival instinct for their ego. That's why confessions often feel off. There's a lack of genuine remorse, a rush to control how the story lands, and a subtle emphasis on how they've admitted enough rather than taking full responsibility. Their focus was on the optics, not the impact. Understanding this changes the way you process the entire situation. You begin to see the confession not as a gift, not as courage, and not as an act of honesty, but as a maneuver to protect themselves from being exposed. And in that realization lies clarity. You can separate your own emotions from their motives, see the truth for what it is, and recognize that the fear driving their actions was never about you. It was always about them, and their ego needed saving more than your trust ever did. Number 13. You're disturbed because your intuition was right all along. There's a unique kind of unease that hits when someone finally confesses what they did behind your back. It's not just shock or disgust. It's the deep, unsettling confirmation of something your gut already knew. For weeks, months, or even years, your instincts were signaling that something was off. Maybe it was a tone that didn't match the words, a glance that lingered too long, or a detail that never quite added up. You brushed it off because nothing concrete had surfaced yet. But when the confession comes, it isn't a surprise. It's validation, and validation often hits harder than the original betrayal. Your intuition doesn't just operate in a vacuum. It absorbs subtle cues, energy shifts, and inconsistencies that your conscious mind might ignore. That means while they were acting, lying, and manipulating, you were quietly taking note of all the small signs that screamed something was wrong. You felt the tension, the misalignment, the energy that didn't make sense, and you carried it with you, even if you couldn't name it. When the confession finally arrives, all of that quiet awareness crystallizes into a painful clarity. The disturbing feeling you've had all along wasn't paranoia. It was evidence. What makes this realization so powerful is that it reframes the story entirely. You weren't imagining things, you weren't overthinking, and you weren't blind to their actions. Your discernment was accurate. Your awareness was real. That means the betrayal wasn't just about what they did. It's about the arrogance it took to think they could deceive someone who was already tuned in. This clarity brings both discomfort and empowerment. The disturbance you feel is a reminder that you were right, that your instincts were sharp, and that your perception cannot be dismissed. The confession doesn't negate your intuition. It confirms it. And in that confirmation lies a quiet, undeniable strength, the ability to trust yourself, to see through deception, and to recognize the truth even when others try to hide it. The unease is temporary, but the clarity it delivers is lasting. Number 14. The truth didn't break you. It freed you from protecting a lie. The hardest part of betrayal is often the weight of carrying it unknowingly. For years you may have shielded them in your mind, defended their actions, or questioned your own judgment because you didn't know the full story. You carried the burden of a reality that wasn't yours, absorbing doubt, confusion, and second-guessing as if it were somehow your responsibility. The confession, as jarring and disgusting as it is, doesn't mark the end of your world. It marks the release from a lie you were never meant to carry. That freedom is subtle at first. It shows up as a shift in perception, a sense of clarity that cuts through the fog of manipulation. Suddenly, moments that once felt confusing make sense. Their actions, their words, the way they seemed off. It all aligns into a painful but coherent picture. The weight lifts because you no longer have to reconcile their behavior with your trust. You don't have to excuse, rationalize, or cover for someone else's deceit. That liberation, strange as it feels amidst disgust and anger, is a kind of quiet victory. There's also an unexpected power in knowing the truth. When the lie is exposed, you can finally make decisions rooted in reality rather than assumption. You can set boundaries, reclaim energy, and choose how to respond without being tethered to their manipulation. The confession doesn't make the betrayal less harmful, but it transforms your relationship to it. You are no longer a participant in their deception. You are a witness to it, fully aware and fully in control of your next move. In the end, the truth acts as a reset. It doesn't erase the hurt, but it removes the confusion and doubt that allowed the lie to linger. The disgust you feel is the necessary detox, the mind and heart recalibrating to reality. Once that phase passes, what remains is clarity, empowerment, and the rare kind of relief that comes from no longer carrying a false narrative. The confession may have revealed the depths of their betrayal, but it also reveals your resilience and restores the integrity of your own perception, leaving you free to move forward unburdened. Conclusion. What we've uncovered in this journey is far more than just the confession itself. It's the anatomy of deception, the psychology of betrayal, and the raw truth of human behavior when ego, fear, and self-preservation take the lead. Every confession you witness, every revelation that hits you like a gut punch, carries layers that most people never stop to notice. It's never just about the act. It's about intention, timing, calculation, and the hidden motivations that linger beneath the surface. From the panic that forces the truth out, to the strategic planning behind every hidden move, to the way your very strength and discernment made you the target, these moments reveal both the character of the person who betrayed you and the clarity of your own perception. We've seen how the truth doesn't just shock, it clarifies. It exposes the selfishness, the manipulations, and the carefully crafted facades. It shows how some people justify the unjustifiable, how they prioritize their own comfort over your trust, and how they fear exposure far more than the consequences of their actions. And yet, for all the disgust and anger these confessions bring, there is a silver lining: liberation. The truth frees you from carrying a lie that was never yours, from defending actions that were never defensible, and from second-guessing the instincts that guided you all along. Every moment of deceit they orchestrated only highlights your resilience, your discernment, and your unshakable strength. In the end, this is not a story about weakness or defeat. It's a story about clarity, empowerment, and the extraordinary ability to see through deception and emerge unbroken. The confession may have revealed the depths of someone else's betrayal, but it also reveals your own capacity to understand, adapt, and rise above. You are not defined by their lies, their panic, or their fear. You are defined by your awareness, your patience, and the power of seeing the truth for what it is. If this video resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more insights that dig beneath the surface. Like this video to show support, comment below with your thoughts or experiences, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Every share, every comment, and every like helps bring clarity to more people and exposes truths that others wish to keep hidden. Stay aware, stay strong, and never let deception steal your clarity. God bless you.